Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. The term national security is usually associated with military might. Interestingly, it also involves protecting technology, but our guest stretches it further to protecting Canadian intellectual property. David Durand is a lawyer and founder of the Minimum Viable Intellectual Property Organization. He's also president of FORPIQ. Welcome to Boom and Bust, sir.
Hi, Tony. How are you doing today?
Doing well. What does FORPIQ stand for?
FORPIQ stands for the Form of Intellectual Property Quebec. So we're a Montreal-based not-for-profit where we're becoming more Canadian in scope, trying to get as many small, medium-sized enterprises getting better at intellectual property.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, good luck with that endeavor as well as all the other things that you're doing there. I guess first thing to do is to discuss the problem. Is Canada's IP under foreign threat?
The answer to that is yes, it is. It's constantly being searched, poked for. There's many instances where there are foreign agents that are coming into public enterprises and taking intellectual property, and in certain cases, even filing them in their own home countries, like in China, for instance.
Yeah, can you give some concrete examples of that, David?
Well, there was the case of, there was a recent case of Hydro-Quebec, where they had a foreign agent that worked within the research department of Hydro-Quebec, and they had been caught by the RCMP recently, and I would say probably the last month or so, but the damage was already done because they had already filed numerous research publications and international patent applications in China.
Now, maybe give us, our audience, a sense of how intellectual property does relate to national security. Why is these kinds of examples considered national security threats per se?
Well, it's a great question that you're asking because there's a bit of a balancing act between national security interests versus the intellectual property framework in Canada. So if we go, the concept is that when you want to get an intellectual property right, you have to be able to file it before the Canadian Intellectual Property Office. It follows its course. And once your patent, for instance, is considered to be patentable, then you obtain a right of exclusion for the next 20 years. This is important. And what happens when you have a national security threat? People are trying to undertake intellectual property theft from companies through both front door and back door techniques.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about those front door and back door methods in just one second. Maybe give our audience first, though, a sense of why our intellectual property safeguards are inadequate currently.
Well, I would say that the government of Canada puts a lot of the onus on researchers, for instance, to be able to detect foreign interference, to be able to detect situations in which their intellectual property might be compromised. The government of Canada has put out many different types of guidelines, for instance, risk impact assessments, as well as national security guidelines to universities, for instance, that are expected to be able to find these interferences and then to be able to call upon them to the authorities as well.
Is that adequate, though? Is that clearly it doesn't seem to be doing the job, but tell us maybe what needs to be done better in these situations.
What needs to be done better is that there needs to be a national strategy put in place that can oversee all the different types of, call it, interactions with the national security structure that you have in Canada. We have to look at it from a perspective not only of intellectual property, but you also have to look at it from a point of view from the Investment Canada Act, as well as through cybersecurity measures that have to be put in place as well. So basically, there needs to be an entity that has to be created that can oversee all these different factors and considerations when looking at the creation of a national strategy, a national security strategy in Canada.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think that's important that there does have to be some government involvement in this because there's a lot of malevolent state actors out there, as well as independent malevolent actors that are seeking to gain access to our intellectual property, all of the research and development that goes into something. We're going to continue our discussion after the break with David Durand. He is a lawyer, founder of and president of FORPIQ.